Yes. Yeah. Cross, yeah, and it's the same thing. But I can first. You don't have to park in the
I've got almost 6 o'clock, so if you're outside getting snacks or drinks, I would encourage you to find a seat here pretty quick.
Does anyone have here?
We got a pretty full house tonight. That's good. All right. Welcome, everyone. Get to know your septic. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy that the city of Bella Vista reached out to Cooperative Extension Service to help organize this. A little bit about myself. I've lived in Northwest Arkansas for 32 years. 22 of those have been spent in the water quality industry. I started out as a wastewater treatment operator, then I moved over to water treatment. I worked at Beaver Water District for 16 years. I worked in the lab there. I was an environmental specialist most of the time. Got to do some pretty cool projects. And now I'm excited to be an urban stormwater educator with the Cooperative Extension Service. And I'll tell you a little more about our program and how we fit in with Bella Vista in a little bit. But first and foremost, I'm not a septic tank expert. I know a lot about wastewater treatment, but I know a lot about advanced aeration treatment plants and not much about on-site wastewater treatment. But luckily, we have several experts that you'll hear from tonight. So after me, Richard Murphy is going to talk from the Department of Health. He's environmental manager of the Northwest region. And then Shelley Smith from H2 Ozarks, a local watershed organization. She's a program manager and working on some real cool septic programs. Chris Fuller from Bella Vista POA is going to give us an update on what the water quality status is for Bella Vista resources. And y'all do have some beautiful water resources here. And then Taylor Robertson, is the senior planner here at the city. And she works next door at the Community Development Services. So what is stormwater? In Arkansas, really everywhere, water, when it falls from the sky, can't soak through impervious surfaces such as pavement, rooftops, concrete, like it can when it falls on the soil. This means that there's more stormwater runoff in cities than there is in forest or fields. Water flows from impervious surfaces such as driveways, rooftops, sidewalks, parking lots, and into storm drains. Many people think those storm drains go to wastewater treatment plants, but they do not. They go straight to the nearest creek with whatever pollutants they pick up along the way. So pollution can come from many places in the environment. And we've broken those up into point source and non-point source. Point source pollution is like wastewater treatment plants is the #1 example. You can actually point at where the pollution is coming from. But since the Clean Water Act in the 70s, point sources have been highly regulated by the EPA and have to be tested very frequently, depending on what size they are, almost every day. And they have stringent standards that they have to meet. So now a lot of the pollution comes from non-point source pollution. And that's just pollution that comes from the landscape. As stormwater runoff runs across parking lots, runs across our yards, especially on some of these steep slopes, water's heavy and it can pick up a lot of stuff on the way, like pet waste, extra fertilizer that's on the scene and from our homes. There's lots of things we can do to prevent stormwater pollution. Humans changed the hydrologic cycle. Before human development, the natural landscape, when an average rainfall, 50% of that water gets soaked into the ground. Some of it shallow, some of it deep. 40% of that rain is lost to evapotranspiration. Transpiration is when the plants suck the water out of the ground and then release it to transpiration as moisture in the atmosphere. And evaporation when water droplets on leaves evaporate or puddles. But then we build a neighborhood. And all of a sudden we've covered up that natural ground cover to about 30 to 50% impervious. Again, roofs, roads, sidewalks, anything that prevents that water from soaking in. And just at 30 to 50% built out, we've increased the runoff by 3 times. And then think of big box stores and parking lots or downtown areas that are almost fully developed. You might have some little green spaces here and there, but they're 75 to 100% impervious surfaces. And the runoff from an average rain is 55%. So we went from 10% in the natural environment to 55% in the complete built out. We definitely have an effect on the hydrologic side. Here's an example from the Center of Watershed Protection. I'm not sure where this picture comes from. It's not Northwest Arkansas, but this looks like an average city, some neighborhoods, some big interstate. Now let's look at the impervious surfaces. We have sidewalks, driveways, buildings, roads. But here's what it looks when we cover up all those impervious surfaces. So this is at least 50%, I would say. So 3 times more runoff from this picture than before we built anything. Storm drains, at least in Northwest Arkansas, do not flow to wastewater treatment plants. I've already said that once, I'm going to stress it again. It amazes me when we're out doing stormwater education that residents of Northwest Arkansas don't know this. Most of them think that water is going to the wastewater treatment plant and being treated. But we are MS4 cities, including Bella Vista, and that just means municipal separate storm and sewer systems. 2 completely different sets of pipes. Here is kind of how a stormwater system might look underground. There's going to be several inlets depending on what's highest in this depiction. The neighborhood is at the highest location, so there's going to be curb cuts. And, you know, we're going to be collecting water that runs off your roof and downspout through your yard. And then there's also roads. Well, first of all, at the home, we have lots of pollutants that can get into the system that way. But then think of roads, think of all the muck, think of the oil spill, the salt that's put down to melt the ice. These are all necessary things. But when it rains, that gets dissolved or carried into the storm system and causes pollution. So I mentioned I work for Cooperative Extension Service. It's University of Arkansas System, Division of Agriculture, Cooperative Extension Service. I bet that's the longest job title of anyone in the room. But I'm a county agent and I cover Benton and Washington counties, and I am an urban stormwater educator. And how we fit in with the 17 cities, including Bella Vista in Northwest Arkansas that are designated MS4s, is every MS4 city has a permit that they have to, on their discharge into the river. And part of that permit requires education and outreach, just like tonight. We're doing lots of cleanups. We're educating. I went to the mule jump last week. That was interesting. It was a lot of fun. I've never been, but we just try to get out there and educate Northwest Arkansas for these cities, 2 counties, and the University of Arkansas. So they don't have to do it all themselves. They don't have to hire someone. They can use me and my coworker to partner. Here's a little 10 things that you can do at home to prevent stormwater pollution. Number 1 is simple. Don't dump anything into the storm system or a storm drain. Nothing. Number 2 is pick up your pet waste. Pet waste is high in bacteria and in nutrients, and that's easily carried to storm drains. 3 is fix your auto or your cars if they're leaking. It costs too much to repair that car, but you still need it, at least put some absorbent cloth underneath it to catch that oil and keep it out of the storm drains. Use fertilizer sparingly, and if you get some on your sidewalk or road, please sweep that up. Compost your yard waste. If you leave your grass clippings in the yard, that just keeps the nutrients in the yard, and you won't have to add as much fertilizer. You can redirect your downspouts or capture runoff in a rain garden or a rain barrel. When you wash your car, the best place to wash it is at a car wash. If you wash it on the street, like many people do, it's washing that soap, oil, grime from the car and putting it straight into a river. Practice integrated pest management. I'm not an expert on this one, but it's using less pesticides and using beneficial bugs to control your problem bugs. And minimize erosion. If at all possible, don't let any bare soil be on your yard. So what do septic tanks have to do with stormwater? Not a whole lot in reality. Septic tanks are designed to treat wastewater and make that water clean, let it filter through the soil. And we're going to hear much more about that tonight. And the only impact to stormwater I can see is when septic systems fail, it's possible for that wastewater to surface. And then if it looks like this and it rained, it could be part of stormwater pollution. This amazes me. Bella Vista makes up 5% of Benton County land area, 5%. But according to these numbers from regional planning that I got, makes up 60% of Benton County septic systems. So it's a very concentrated cluster of septic systems. It looks solid red in the photo. And one quick shout out for an event coming up tomorrow, running through Sunday, before I turn this over to the experts that follow, is we're doing a Sugar Creek watershed cleanup. I didn't call it Big Sugar, I didn't call it Little Sugar, so we called it Sugar Creek because I think it transitions somewhere in Bella Vista. But it's pick up supplies and clean up at your own pace. We have a really cool grand prize. It's 2 nights at a cabin for 4 people, and it includes a float trip on the Elk for 4 people. You are automatically registered when you sign up. You can pick up supplies next door at the Community Development Services, or if you live in Pea Ridge or Little Flock, you can get that at City Hall. And with that, I would like to present our next, or introduce our next presenter. All right, Richard.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. There we go. Yeah, so I'm Richard Murphy. I'm the environmental manager for the State Health Department. I cover the 19-county Northwest region. So my territory goes over to Mountain Home, down to Morrilton, across to Waldron, and then back up here. So it's a pretty big area. Of course, Benton and Washington County are the busiest parts of the region, especially with septic systems. Benton County issues more septic system permits than most our other regions in the state do, the whole other region. So Benton County by far issues more septic system permits than anywhere else in the state. So definitely the busiest place. So I've been with the health department since 1994, started as an environmental health specialist in Washington County, then became program specialist, went out on my own in 2002 and designed septic systems. Can't hear me? Went out in 2002. What is it? Better? Okay, sorry, I thought I was yelling. I felt like I was yelling up here.
Speak into the microphone.
Okay, I will. So started with the health department in 94, have been there, left and did septic system design from for about 6 years, from 2002 to 2008, and then came back to the health department. I've been the manager ever since. So I basically spend most of my time supervising the county environmental health specialist. We've got about 40 in the region, and those EHSs do both restaurant inspections and issue permits for septic systems, public swimming pools. They have a whole lot of, irons in the fire. But we're going to talk about septic systems today. So in 1977, Act 402 was passed. Act 402 basically established the rules and regulations for septic systems. And you'll hear me say on-site wastewater systems, septic systems, those are interchangeable. But until 1977, there really weren't any set rules for septic systems. This regulation, or these the regs that were established, determined who could design septic systems, who could install septic systems, and kind of the design parameters for how they were to be designed and how they were to be installed. So the health department licensed private individuals, we call them designated representatives, and they design septic systems. We have one in the room here, Bobby Buchanan. She's been working in Bella Vista for years. I won't say how many years, but a long time. And so they design septic systems. They go out and evaluate the site, see where the house is going to go, evaluate the soil, how the land lays, and then they design a septic system and turn in a permit application to the health department. So these DRs, we call them DRs for short, they're private individuals. We license them, but that's it. They charge what they want, and they work for themselves. They turn in a permit application to the health department. Our environmental health specialist reviews the permit application to make sure it's complete. There's a lot of information that has to be included in that permit. And then they go out and do a site evaluation and make sure that they agree with the DR on how the system was designed. So is it sized appropriately, or they meet the setbacks that have to be met, and all of those different things that have to be checked. And if they're okay with it, then they issue what's called a permit for construction. So now the owner has a permit to construct the septic system according to that design. Once they have that permit, they can hire a septic system installer. We also license them. If you want to install a septic system in Arkansas, you have to be licensed by the health department to do that. Being a plumber doesn't qualify you to install septic systems. You have to have that installer license as well. They install the system according to that approved plan. Then the installer submits the elevation readings for the system components to the health department. And then we issue the permit if everything's okay with it. We don't install or inspect every septic system that's installed anymore. If it's an installer that we're not familiar with, if it's a new one, someone that maybe we've had some trouble with, then we go and inspect those systems. But if it's an installer that's in good standing, we haven't had any documented problems with them, they've been doing it for a while, then they basically will record their shots, where all the components are, turn it in, and then we issue what's called a permit for operation. So there's two permits, one to construct it, one to operate it. Same piece of paper, it's just basically signing it on the front and back. Well, this is kind of hard to see, but this is sort of the design that's turned into the health department. This is just a generic one. It shows where the road is, where the proposed house is going to be. A lot of times the house is just kind of an estimate of what those dimensions are. We just want to make sure it's going to fit into that box that's being represented there. And then it shows where the septic tank is. It shows the D box. It shows the individual lateral lines. And then we make sure that all the setbacks are met, that it's following contour and everything that's supposed to be included in this design is there. Okay. So what was going on before 1977? There were these bulletins, Bulletin 9, and they put out a new bulletin about every 3 to 5 years. So you'd have a Bulletin 9 from 1962 and a Bulletin 9 from 1965, 67. So, and those changed, not drastically, but there was some information in there like setbacks to lakes and things like that that changed depending on which Bulletin 9 you were under. So if a subdivision was platted before the regs in 1977, then that subdivision adheres to the regulations of the bulletin that was in effect at the time it was platted. That's Bella Vista. Bella Vista was platted before 1977. So the lots in Bella Vista have to adhere to the regulation that was in effect at that time. That's why you guys don't have alternate areas up here. An alternate area is just a place set aside on the lot to replace the system if it fails. But that's not required in Bella Vista because the subdivision was platted before that was a regulation. Okay. So Bulletin 9 was kind of a guideline. There's no real record anywhere of these septic systems that were installed before 77. Okay. There's a couple other things that have changed since then. There's county ordinances. Act 402, those original regulations had a 10-acre exemption in them. So if you were a landowner that owned 10 acres or more, you didn't have to get a permit from the health department to install your septic system, as long as it was installed in a sanitary way and you met certain setbacks. So I guess the thought process there was if you're out in the middle of 10 acres and you put in a septic system, it's not going to hurt anybody. Well, you know, there's still could be a creek running right through the middle of that 10 acres, picking up your sewage and taking it right downhill to the neighbor, right? So some counties went in, Washington and Benton County are two of them, that eliminated the 10-acre exemption in the state law. So they basically passed ordinance and said the state will let you have an exemption, but we're not going to let you have an exemption in these counties. And we supported that. We thought that was a good idea. In Washington County, back 10 or 15 years ago, they passed an ordinance that said that any when a property is sold, if it has a septic system on it, that septic system has to be inspected. It didn't really say what the inspection had to be, but it just said it had to be inspected. The other part of that ordinance was if you were going to sell a piece of property, you had to have a test done, a soil test done on the lot, and disclose to the potential buyer whether or not that site would pass a perk test. We don't really do perk tests anymore. That's an old way of doing it, but it's still kind of some terminology. Now we dig test pits, we get out into the test pit and evaluate the soil, and that tells us how big of a septic system, you know, the site needs, if it'll support a system at all. But in Washington County, they passed that ordinance that said that the sites had to be inspected. According to the EPA, the Clean Water Act from years ago, water companies may not provide water without an approved means of sewage disposal. So you should not be able to go out in the county and build a house and get a water connection unless you have an approved means of sewage disposal. If the water company is providing water service without that, then that's a violation of the law. If you're on a well, it's harder to catch some of those folks if they're bootlegging in a system. So what is a septic system? You know, you basically have all your water coming out of the house into a 4-inch pipe. It runs into a septic tank. We'll talk about the septic tank here in a little bit, but the solids are left in the tank and the water leaves. And then the water goes out to a leach field, disposal field out in the yard. Soaks into the soil, hopefully gets cleaned up real well before it reaches the groundwater. But the basic septic system is a septic tank and then some lateral lines out in the yard. There's a septic tank, concrete septic tank. This one's, you know, probably at 1,250 gallons. This will be buried under the ground most of the time. You're not going to see this, but this tank has a riser at the inlet and a riser at the outlet, and those should be extended to the ground surface so that you can have access to the tank. If you've got a septic system that's been in the ground for 10 years, you may not have access to the tank, which is kind of a bad deal because you really ought to have the tank pumped about every 5 to 7 years. So if you haven't had your tank pumped in 17 years and you call a company to have them come out and pump it, if they do pump the tank and access the tank, have them go ahead and install some access risers so next time it'll be easy to get to. This is what happens in a septic tank. The water comes in, we know what's in the water. It's pretty bad. The heavy materials in that wastewater leaving the house sink to the bottom and become sludge. The lighter materials float to the top. This is going to be, your greases and oils and things like that. They float to the top and become scum. So you see that the way the inlet T and the outlet T are baffle are set up, only water can leave the tank. That's what's supposed to happen. The solid materials stay in the bottom, the floating materials stay in the top, and just water leaves. We don't want solid materials leaving the septic tank and getting out into the disposal field. That clogs everything up and causes it to fail. Now, the reason you pump a tank is over a period of time, that sludge level at the bottom will start to build up, will start to get thicker, and the scum layer at the top will start to get thicker too. And if those get thick enough to where either one of those materials starts to leave out of that outlet T, then you've got solids going out to your field and you got a potential problem coming. So you can have the tank checked. If the combined depth of the sludge and the scum is equal to about a third of the capacity of the tank, then it's time to have the tank pumped. Okay. And that's probably not something you want to check yourself. But again, if you haven't had your tank pumped in 10 years, you probably are going to want to do it. All right. So the main thing is that only water leaves this tank. Now, I'm not saying it's clean water, but at least all the solids should be out of it. So what happens when it leaves the tank? A standard, the most common system is a distribution box system. So you'll have one pipe leaving the tank and it flows into a D box, and then that D box splits the flow to however many lateral lines you have. The lateral lines again are determined by the number of bedrooms of the house and what the soil was like. So this one that we're looking at here on the left has just got 3 lines coming out of it. The picture on the right is kind of the inside of the D box. The white pipe on the left is the pipe coming in, and then the blue pipes are the pipes going out. They're usually in the box. They're about 1 inch or 2 lower than the pipe coming in. Okay. Now they've gone in and installed these little dial-a-flows or speed levelers on the pipes. And what those do is you can grab those and turn them, and you can make sure that the water leaves the D box at the same rate. It leaves out and goes to each line at the same time. So if the box gets a little bit off level to where you have one pipe taking all the water, you can install these speed levelers in there and kind of change it, pour water in it and watch it flow out to make sure all your lines are getting the same amount of water. A lot of times after a system's installed, that D box will settle a little bit. So it's a good idea to have those in there. So this is the most common setup you're going to see is a distribution box. Again, this is going to be covered up. It's a good idea to have the top of the D box accessible too, so you can get in there and make changes if you need to. Now this thing right here is it's a pressure manifold. You may have it here referred to as a hydro splitter or a spider valve. This will be on a pump system. All of these little hoses going out of there are feeding individual lateral lines. These are a lot more common nowadays than they were 10 years ago. You see a lot more of these. We can do this with unequal length lines, but generally you're going to have a pump system if you've got one of these out in your yard. It also should be accessible to the surface. More commonly is you may have what's called a diversion valve system. Those are more common in Bella Vista. You'll have a valve. See this thing on the left, it's got a setting for number 1, a setting for number 2. If you have one of these out in your yard, right above where the lateral lines are, there should be a 4-inch pipe sticking out, hopefully with a cap on it. If you shine a flashlight down in there, you should see this valve with a 1 or 2 on it. If you have this valve needs to be turned twice a year. And if you haven't done that and your system hasn't failed yet, congratulations, but you're very lucky. But this basically, the distribution box system, the lines all fill up at the same time. With the diversion valve system, they fill up one at a time. And as they get full, they spill over and go to the next one. Then they spill over and go to the next one. That's fine, but if the line stays saturated with water all the time, it eventually is going to fail. It's going to go septic and it's going to seal itself off and you're going to have a problem. So check and find out if you've got a diversion valve system. And if you do, just make sure that this valve's getting turned a couple of times a year. It basically just switches the water back and forth from 2 different parts of the system. It gives one part of the system a period of time to rest so it can kind of recover. But if it's there, you should see a pipe sticking above the ground, look down in there and you'll see that valve. It takes what they call a key. They have a pipe with just a little angle thing on it. You stick it down in there and turn it. If you haven't done this before, then you might want to talk to an installer and see if you can get a key for it. Well, that's kind of some lateral lines being installed. The photo on the left is pretty much a flat ground system. So of course you don't have many of those in Bella Vista. But that one's pretty flat. And you can see the lateral lines are dug there, and the lines are on contour. So the beginning, middle, and the end of the line should all be installed along the same ground elevation. So some people think that the lateral lines run downhill, but they shouldn't. One lateral line should follow the contour, and then you drop down and put in another one and follow the contour. So that's kind of a flat ground system on the left. The one on the right is more common in Bella Vista. That's a sloping system there. But you can see how the lines kind of follow along with the contour of the land. Also, the system on the left has got, it looks like easy flow pipe, which is a pipe and gravel substitute. And then on the one on the right, it's got infiltrator chambers, which is another pipe and gravel substitute. It's just a product that can be used in place of installing a 4-inch pipe and gravel. A normal lateral line is going to kind of look like this. If you did a cross section through your lateral line, most of them are 18 inches deep. There's about 6 inches of gravel below a 4-inch perforated pipe and about 2 inches of gravel above the 4-inch perforated pipe. And then above that, there should be a barrier, either untreated building type paper or geotextile fabric. And then there's about 6 inches of cover over the top of that. So your lateral lines, your disposal lines out there are only about 18 inches deep. And the top of the gravel is only about 6 inches underground. So you can see it would be really easy to dig into one of those with just doing something only 6 inches deep, planting a tree or something like that. You could really get into your lateral field. So it's important to know where your disposal field is and to leave it alone as much as possible. Okay. Some of you may still have these inspection ports in your yard. If it's a system that was installed years ago, you may have seen this driving through town, and you'll see all these pipes sticking up in a row down the side of somebody's yard. These are inspection ports that are installed at the end of the lateral lines. And you can take the cap off and look down in there and just really measure how much water is in the line. It's really good to evaluate a septic system to see how well it's doing. If you have a problem somewhere, then this could help you to see, well, I've got 5 lines, but only 3 of them are holding water and the other ones have nothing. You know, so it's just kind of a diagnosis thing. They're almost never installed anymore. I don't know, I haven't seen hardly any of them go in.
My designs have
I
them.
know
I think
yours
they're
do.
very essential, and I wish y'all would require.
Yeah,
them.
they hardly ever get installed anymore. You just hardly ever see them. But, and I think a lot of times people just go out there and cut them off.
Especially in Bella Vista, they can be cut off so you
Right.
can mow over them
Right, it's true.
and still access them, but they're
Yeah.
real helpful, especially in Bella Vista spaces.
But if you see those, you know what they are now. Some other possible system components that you may have that's, you know, if it's not just the standard system, there's a lot of pump systems in Bella Vista and in Benton County. If you have a pump in your septic tank, there has to be electricity run to that pump. There should be an alarm panel mounted outside, a wiring panel. You may see a little box with a red light on top of it. That's your alarm panel for your pump. If that should be a visual alarm and an audible alarm. If your alarm's going off, then there's something wrong with your pump. And that thing is supposed to be set up so that the alarm goes off before you're completely full. So if you see the alarm go off, call somebody out there to get it fixed right away, and maybe you can still continue to flush the toilets for 6 hours or something to get it fixed. But if you ignore it for a week, then you're going to have something backing up in your house. Okay. So just watch for those alarms, have the number ready to call somebody to get them out there and look at it. We used to have a lot of problems with septic tank pumps because they weren't wired up very well. They weren't watertight and they would burn up, in just no time flat. But the way that we're having those put together now, they should last, for years and years and years. You shouldn't have a whole lot of trouble with them. Okay. But if you're getting a high water alarm, that means you've got a problem with your pump. Some of you may have aerobic treatment units. An aerobic treatment unit is like your own little individual sewer treatment plant right at your house. They cost a little more money to put in. Most of them incorporate some kind of motor that's going to pump air down into the septic tank. So if you've got a little box out there on the ground somewhere with a motor running in it all the time, you probably got an ATU. Those are supposed to have a service contract with those for people to come out and look at them and make sure everything's working okay. So if you have one and you've never had it checked or anything, you might want to check on that too. Some folks may have a drip irrigation system. You're normally only going to put those in as a last ditch effort to install the system because they're really expensive. Where a normal septic system, maybe $8,000. A drip system's going to be $25,000 or more. Normally putting one of those. All of those have got to incorporate some kind of treatment unit with them as well, and you have to have a maintenance contract. And then remember, if you've got one of those serial distribution systems, turn your valve. So let's talk about why septic systems fail. Most of the time, it's because of hydraulic overload. That means more water is going into the system than what it was designed to handle. So again, we design septic systems based off the number of bedrooms and the soil. So we have a soil pit dug on the property. It basically tells us where the seasonal water table is, how long we're going to have to store your wastewater in that soil before it's going to be allowed to soak in. So if we go out there and dig a test pit and it looks like we've got a water table at 24 inches, then that means for several months out of the year, if we dig a hole there, we're going to encounter water at 24 inches in that soil. Well, if you're every day trying to put wastewater out into a soil that's already saturated with water, it doesn't have anywhere to go. So we use that soil information and the estimated water usage to figure out how big the system is going to be. If it's bad soil, then you may need 600-foot of lateral line. If it's really good soil, you may only need 250-foot of lateral lines, right? So it's just the size of the house and how the soil is. So if we design a system for 300 gallons a day and you're putting 400 gallons a day out there, well, the system's probably not going to work. There's a little bit of a safety feature built into it. Most people don't use as much water as what they're sized for. A 400 or a 3-bedroom house is sized for 450 gallons a day. Most of you folks not going to use that. It's not going to be that much. But if you're using more than that, then it may be a problem. So more bedrooms or residents than the system was designed for, or if you've got some leaking plumbing fixtures, which can really add up in no time. If you've got a toilet that's running all the time, that is a lot of excess water going out to your system. Okay. Septic system installation issues. Installers should never install a septic system if the ground is overly wet. If it's sloppy and they're rutting it up and sinking up their equipment out there when they're trying to put it in, they should not be out there. It smears the trench walls, it compacts the soil, and it's going to really interfere with that soil's ability to soak up the water. So if you're having a system installed and you're in a real big hurry to get it done and the installer says it's too wet, listen to them. It's in your best interest to wait. A lot of times it goes the other way though. The installer may say, I've got 5 jobs booked up. I got to get this one done. So you may want to insist that they wait until it dries up. Okay. And then damage done to the soils during lot clearing. If you've got a lot, you buy a lot and it's covered with 75-year-old oak trees and they come in there and just push those things over and leave root balls the size of a Volkswagen, that is not good for your site. It's a lot of disturbed soil. So there's a way to do that with as little damage as possible, whether it's grinding the stumps up, cutting them down and just picking them out real carefully. But pushing over a 30-inch diameter oak tree right in the middle of a leach field really does a lot of damage. So you want to be careful.
In the winter when it's raining too,
Yeah.
is when they're, that's a problem.
And then after the system's installed, if you're doing landscaping, you don't want to go in there and cut everything up. You want to, like I said, the line's only 6 inches underground. If you go in there and cut down a foot to level things off or to build retaining walls or whatever, you've dug right into your system. So landscaping, installing irrigation systems over the top of the field can be bad. And then additional construction. People may go out and build a shop building or something right over the top of the leach field. We see people build swimming pools over the top of their disposal field all the time and then have nowhere to put it. It's not over the top of the disposal field, it's through the disposal field. You'd think they'd hit a septic line and say, maybe we ought to rethink this, but it happens all the time. So how to protect your septic system, educate yourself, know where the components are, what kind of system do you have? Is it a D-box? Is it a diversion valve? Is it supposed to have some kind of maintenance? Educate yourself on what you have. If you don't have a copy of your septic permit and you want it, you probably will be able to get it from the health department. Call the Benton County Health Unit and just ask if you fill in your lot number. They should be able to get it for you, okay, if you don't have it. We may not but most times we do. Protect the system, monitor and evenly distribute your water usage as much as possible. You don't want to do all of your water usage first thing in the morning and then not do anything the rest of the day. Try to spread out some of the showers during the day if you can, some of the loads of laundry, running the dishwasher. Try to spread it out over the day and not give it a big burst of water all at one time. Don't build over, dig into your system, restrict traffic from your system. Don't let people drive over it. It's not a good idea to plant trees over your septic system. And then just taking care of it, limit the use of disinfectants. Normal household cleaning stuff is not going to cause a big problem, but you don't want to dump a gallon of bleach down your toilet, every day or even once a week. Just normal cleaning's okay, but you don't want to kill your septic. All right. And then don't flush harsh chemicals, solvents, paint, non-biodegradable items. Okay. I don't know if y'all can see this very well, but back in September of 2010, we had a drought in Northwest Arkansas. And if you've ever used Google Earth, if you go to Google Earth and look at the date from September 2010, you can identify thousands of septic systems in Northwest Arkansas because there's these wonderful green stripes all over the place. Because everything was bone dry except for where the lateral lines are. So if you are having trouble identifying your system, it's harder in Bella Vista because of all the trees. But in some areas, if you're having a hard time identifying where it is, just go to Google Earth and look at September 2010 and it'll show you. The picture on the left, these two homes are in the same subdivision right outside of Fayetteville. The home on the left, you can see there's 4 lateral lines running from north to south. I think y'all can see those. They went in after the permit was issued and built a pool in the back, a circle driveway in the front, and there's a kid's playground back in the northwest corner back there. So the question comes up as to what are they going to do if this septic system has to be replaced? Where are they going to put a septic system replacement? They have used up just about every inch of available space on their lot. Everything over to the right next to the road, that's all where they built the privacy fence. It's kind of disturbed there. So they're just hoping and praying that this system lasts until public sewer gets out to this subdivision, which may be 50 years from now. Now the house on the right, same situation. They only had to install 3 lines. Their soil was a little better. It's pretty much the same size house. They got their pool. But if you look to the left of those 3 lateral lines, if something happens with those, so they got a way to fix it. So they have planned very well. They may not have put in the circle drive that they wanted, or they may not have built a big shop building out there or whatever. But if their septic system fails, they've got a way to fix it. Right. So this again is just kind of a thing that we deal with on a daily basis. It's just kind of a good idea to think ahead about these things because a lot of people surely don't. All right, so this is what you don't want, right? So this is an active septic system malfunction. This is surfacing in the backyard and running along the privacy fence and flowing right onto the neighbor. And they had very limited options for fixing this one too. This is actually going to Board of Health probably in a couple of weeks because they have not fixed it in a while. But this is a really bad septic system surfacing issue right now. And then once that starts happening, you've got some issues and it's going to be hard to fix. There was really nowhere else on this lot to fix this one either. So I think to repair this system, this is a couple of duplexes, but he got a bid at around $85,000 to fix this. So yeah, it's going to be a fortune for him. So you don't want that. That's kind of what sewage in the yard looks like. You should see some dark water and it should smell. I mean, there's going to be a lot of places during the spring around here where you've got a little groundwater on the surface. But if it's really dark and smelly, you'll know sewage when you smell sewage. All right. You can still actually put in an outhouse in Arkansas if you want to, if you don't have any plumbing fixtures or running water to the house. So if you want to go out in the middle of the woods and build a cabin and not have any plumbing fixtures and no running water, you can. There's specifications for how to build an appropriate outhouse if you want to do that. Okay, so I can answer questions now, or we can do it at the end.
Couple of minutes while we swap out, but there will be time for questions at the end.
Okay. Anybody have any questions? Yes, sir. Right behind you.
Ridx,
Yes.
advertise on TV to help keep your system working properly.
Right.
Do that.
We have no evidence that says it's bad. And we have no evidence that says it's any benefit. So if you want to put it in there, you're more than welcome to, but I haven't seen any data that says that it's beneficial to a septic system at all. There's enough naturally occurring bacteria there that you shouldn't need it. Yeah,
Chemo, what are you doing about remediating systems? with
we don't,
chemo issues?
I'm sorry. So there's been some evidence, is that better? There's been some evidence that maybe people that are taking medications, chemotherapy medications, or even diabetes medications may have some kind of impact on septic system function. I don't know what that is yet. I haven't studied it and I don't have any data on it, but there does seem to be some correlation. So that's something that needs to be looked at. There may be some papers out already, but I'm not aware of them. Are you?
I just heard a couple people say they really damage them, and
There may be some correlation there. I think there may be something to it. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Hey, ballpark, how long does the septic system last?
Well, the old documents used to say 25 to 30 years. I think that has probably been increased some just because of the way we're putting them in now. I don't know if I've actually seen a septic system fail just because it was old. Usually the septic system fails, because it's either got some solids out into it, it's been filled up with tree roots, it's been damaged, something like that. But the actual components now are stronger than they were. Used to use clay tile pipe and all those different things, and they would eventually collapse. So, I think it would be safe to assume, 40 years life expectancy for a system, but it's, it ranges anywhere from 25 to 50.
And we hold the rest of the questions. There will be time at the end, but just stay
Thank
on to
you.
get it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, y'all. Can you hear me now? That's pretty good. All right. Hello. I'm Shelley Smith. I'm the program manager for the septic remediation program that the organization I work for, H2 Ozarks, operates here in Arkansas. H2 Ozarks, and that's what I'm going to tell you guys about, is our septic remediation program, and share with you some information about some of the failures that we have encountered, hopefully to help you learn a little bit on top of Richard's excellent presentation about getting to know your septic, but hopefully we can help you learn a little bit about what happens if you're not taking care of it, because my presentation is full of failures, full of pictures of failures. So our organization is a nonprofit. We work in both Northwest Arkansas and Southern Missouri. Can you still hear me okay? We historically have worked in the area that you can see. We are expanding. We have just been awarded a grant to move a little bit east into the Buffalo River watershed. We're pursuing a grant to move north into Missouri, as far north as Lake of the Ozarks. And so our septic program has been quite popular, and we're excited to see it grow. So we are actively expanding where we're serving, and all the programs that we do at H2 Ozarks are geared toward conserving our amazing water resources. And we do have a lot of amazing water resources in our little corner of the country here. So the overview of our program is that on this map, you can see two watersheds where our program is currently operating in Arkansas: the Beaver Reservoir watershed and then the Buffalo River watershed. They touch each other in Newton County. About Newton County is where they connect. We have $1 million allocated from the Arkansas Department of Agriculture's Natural Resource Division to help homeowners repair or replace failing septic systems. The criteria to participate in our program is very simple. You have to own the home that is in the geography that we're serving, and the health department has to sign off on that it's in failure. So our program is accessible to a lot of people. And as you have seen, we have a lot of septic systems in this corner of the state. So our program came from water quality monitoring that is done through the Department of Environmental Quality. All over the state of Arkansas, there are water quality monitoring sites where data is regularly collected. And this water is tested, and the data is analyzed, and there's a report that's put together that lists water bodies that are considered to be impaired. So the watersheds that are participating in this program that have been selected for our septic remediation program have been listed as impaired for any number of reasons that came from all of that water data monitoring. So the 3 watersheds in Arkansas, and this is a new program in Arkansas, we call it a pilot program because it only just started last year and we're still piloting how it works and figuring it out. In the Beaver Reservoir watershed, the Illinois River watershed, and now the Buffalo River watershed that we just launched moving into as of September of this year. And the purpose of these programs in these watersheds is to help reduce non-point source pollution that Richard was talking about. And one of the reasons this can be so challenging for us here is because of our karst topography. So if you can see in the picture, we have karst topography in Northwest Arkansas, which really creates an incredible opportunity for water on the surface to have a very quick line to the groundwater. So what our programs aim to do is reduce pollutants from the surface, making it into the groundwater. So what I'm going to show you going forward when those pollutants come out of septic tanks are some of the pictures that we have from projects that we are currently working on, projects that we've already completed. And what I'm going to show you in the next many slides are some of the examples, most common examples we've seen of septic failures. Probably the most common failure we see is a collapsed septic tank. So the picture on the left is a metal tank. We don't put metal tanks in anymore for septic systems, but they rust and corrode. And so what you're looking at is a corroded tank where the top is exposed, and that's a piece of plywood that's been put over to just cover it so that the pets that live on this property don't fall in. And it's been like that for a really long time because, as you know, as a septic owner, septic fixes can be quite expensive. So sometimes it takes a little while for homeowners to be prepared to address some of these quite expensive fixes. So this one has been like that for a long time. The picture on the right, we'll talk about a little bit more the project in a few slides, but essentially this is a collapsed tank. It was a concrete tank. And the reason you don't see sewage overflowing is because the homeowners were having it pumped at least every 6 months to reduce the amount of water in it so that it wouldn't overflow into the yard. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that project later. These are more pictures of collapsed tanks. The picture on the left is a tank that is literally cracked at the top. So every time they use water in the home, it just gurgles right to the surface. And the picture on the right is also a cracked tank that is missing a lid in a house where there's overload of water usage in the house. So there are 6 people living in that house on a septic that's really approved for more like 3 people. And so they used to have it pumped regularly to help it, but now not even pumping will help it. And it is just overflowing. This is in their front yard, about 4 feet from the steps that lead to their front door. So they're not using their front door. They're only going in through the side. This was a project that we recently completed where the tank was cracked because it over a lot of time and no maintenance, things that were going into the tank didn't belong in the tank, like flushable wipes. Flushable, not disposable, like don't flush flushable wipes. Terrible idea. So this tank was full of flushable wipes, diapers, cleaning wipes like Clorox wipes, hygiene products, all kinds of things that are not meant to go into the tank. And if you think back to the picture that Richard showed, that those layers were really thick and it gummed up the outlet baffle and broke everything in the system down. So what happened was the tank cracked. Every time they flushed a toilet or ran water inside the house, it would come out of the overflow. It would fall from the plumbing in the floor. This is the crawl space. So it would fall from the plumbing there in the floor, and then it would gurgle to the surface from the tank. This is a home that had 4 children, young children, and they weren't able to use their yard because there's a huge health risk with this. So the picture on the right, you're able to see the collapsed tank, and the picture on the left is where it was backflowing out of the plumbing in the house. Richard showed pictures similar to this, where clearly we're having a problem with lateral lines that for any number of reasons, water is not moving through those lines the way it's supposed to. This is a neighborhood, one house after another, with a failure of the lines. We see instances where gray water lines are not tied into the septic. It's the health department's regulations, the state of Arkansas's regulations that gray water lines need to be tied into septic. So the one on the left is a dishwasher. The one on the right is laundry. But as you can see, it all of that, every time they ran the dishwasher, it's just pooling outside of the house and then running down. This was not the only, there was a failure with the tank on this property as well. These are two different properties, by the way. But there was a failure of the tank on this property as well. So they needed to not just have this gray line tied into the septic, they needed to have the entire system in place. These pictures are of what we call a straight pipe system, sometimes also known as an old farmer's septic. But essentially, this home was placed on the property with no proper septic. There was a pit dug in the ground, plumbing ran out of the house into the gravel-lined pit, and then no processing of that wastewater at all. So eventually, the waste found its way to the surface. And while I was standing there talking with the homeowner's dog was lapping up that water. So risk with not having a properly functioning septic or a proper septic are not just to us. It could be to wildlife, pets, anybody else, anything else in the area. This is a picture that an environmental health specialist, who I believe is here, shared with us, with a title that read "Effluent or Spring?" ? So this looks like a natural spring, which we all have seen out in the beautiful mountains and bluffs around here, except this is not an underground spring. This is a failed septic system. And what this home had, and you can see the home up on the top of the screen, so wastewater coming out of the home into a septic tank, but there were no lateral lines. So what was eventually happening was it was spilling out of the tank and seeping out from this little bluff. So if you can imagine a family on a hike and the kids run up to play with that, that's not a spring, that's wastewater. So any of these failures, our system can help to address. I mean, our program can help to address. The way that our program works is that if you find that your system is in failure, we have a very simple application that we can get you to, and we have to have sign off from the health department. So pretty much immediately we loop in the health department, we get them to evaluate the circumstances and sign off on the failure. Then the process follows all of the same rules that the health department has for permitting systems. So you have to have your new system or your repair designed by a designated representative. They have to submit an application and a design to the health department for this system. Once that system has been approved by the health department, for our program, we ask that you get 3 bids from licensed installers for the installation of this septic. We approve the bid that the homeowner selects. We don't select for the homeowners. The homeowners are allowed to select the bid that they want to go with and the installer that they want to hire to do the work. And then after the installation has happened, our organization can submit to our funder for reimbursement. So the program works on reimbursement. The system has to be installed before we're able to disperse funds. And we generally can turn around a reimbursement in as little as 3, typically more like 4 weeks, but worst case scenario, 6 weeks, we can get a reimbursement to the homeowner. So we try to be as nimble and quick as we can. The way that the financial assistance that we offer works is in 2 ways. We have a grant and a loan program. So a homeowner can qualify for, based on income, and you can see the chart, the income levels. We have basically a sliding scale based on taxable income that you might qualify for a percentage of the project cost as a grant and a percentage of the product cost, the installation cost as a loan. So for example, this is easier to understand with an example. A lot of the homeowners we're working with are elderly on fixed income, say for example, Social Security. Let's say that in this example, the homeowner is making $14,000 in taxable income, maybe with retirement and a retirement account plus Social Security. So with taxable income of $14,000, they're going to fall in the 90% grant range, which means that 90% of the cost of the installation will be free money to the homeowner. and the remaining 10% they can take out as a zero interest loan with us. So if the installation of this new system costs $13,000, the out-of-pocket for the homeowner would be about $1,300, which they could make loan payments to us about $50 a month for 16 months, no interest. So, you know, essentially a $13,000 septic system could cost someone $1,300 made in low monthly payments. Our loans are always zero interest, and the grants are always just free money. The reason we have both grant and loan is, there are two reasons here. The grant portion is so that money is not an obstacle to fixing these problems, because these septic failures pose risk to the environment and to human health. So we don't want money to be the reason we're not fixing it. But also the loan portion is so that loan repayments made to our organization will fund future projects beyond our grant period. So the idea is that this program can go on well beyond the 3 years that it was funded from the Department of Agriculture. The exchange for the loan, the way that we secure the loan that we give any homeowner is with a mortgage on the property. We only place a mortgage on the property for the loan amount. So in that previous example, we would have put a mortgage on the property for $1,300. When the loan was paid off, we file a release of mortgage and everything is taken care of. There is no income cap to participate in our program. The grant percentage stops somewhere around $84,000. So if you're making over $83,000 or $84,000 a year in taxable income, you would qualify for 100% zero interest loan. But I'll show you in another slide coming up how that zero interest makes a really big difference on the bottom line of what the system costs. So I have two projects that I'm going to share with you that we have completed. This first one, if you remember the picture in the top right corner of the tank that had collapsed, this was an elderly couple who had custody of their 3 grandchildren and were raising their 3 grandchildren on a fixed income, only their Social Security. They knew that their septic system was failing and they had been saving for 10 years to get it fixed because that's how much money they needed to save. In our program, they qualified for a 90% grant. So the entire cost was over $11,000. Their out-of-pocket was just over $1,100 for that system. And this was an interesting example of what Richard was talking about with an alternate location. They did not have an alternate location on their property. However, the homeowner owned the adjacent parcel. So they were able to run lateral lines out to the adjacent parcel as a solution there. Another project that we recently completed in Elkins, this was an instance where the septic had been installed. It was a 10-acre plot of land. The septic had been installed before the 10-acre exemption. So there were no regulations adhered to when the septic was installed, and it was just underbuilt for the size of the house. So this is a family of 9 living in the house. What was happening, and there was a pond, you can't see it very well, but in the bottom right picture, just beyond where this line is sort of dragged up, is a pond that's on property. So the tank had cracked. The picture on the top right, what you're looking at is disjointed main lines from the house to the tank. So just where they were parking and entering their house, they were always able to smell sewage because the line was disjointed, like right there. So they get out of the car and they go to walk in and they got a whiff of it every time. They qualified for a 100% loan. They were over our income limit for any grant award, but they did qualify for a 100% loan. The septic was just over $12,000 to install. Their payment is about $102 a month for the maximum loan period that we can offer, which is 10 years. And based on loan rates, if they had to go to the bank to get a loan, it would have cost them $4,800 in interest. So we saved them that with our zero interest loan option. So it saved this family a lot of money. We have some frequently asked questions that I think that I will skip over and wait and see if they come up. And this presentation will be available to you guys. It's going to be, I think, posted online with all the other information from tonight. So you will have this available to you. But what I do want to say is that if you are interested in having us come talk, we love to come talk about septic health and septic maintenance in our program and how we can help people learn how to better take care of this very expensive necessary investment we have underground. So Where did it go? We have given talks with POA and HOA groups just about how to take care of your septic, how to maintain it. I have a whole lot of education up here on the front table, septic tips about what should go down the drain, what should not go down the drain, how to take care of your septic in times of flooding or in winter weather. So we love to come and talk with people about this. We've spoken with lots of realtor groups about our program because especially with the way real estate is bought and sold in this area right now, if the septic has trouble, it can be a nuisance for the sale of a property. And we want to help people understand that we can help get that fixed so that it adds value to the sale in a certain way. But we also have just a lot of educational materials that we can distribute in any number of ways. So if you find that we can be helpful to you, please reach out. My business cards are up here on the table as well as a lot of information. So we can wait till the end for any questions. Thanks, y'all. Oh, I can get it out. There.
Good evening. My name is Chris Fuller. I'm with the Bella Vista Property Owners Association. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the water quality we have here in the city. So my technician and myself take monthly water samples on the lakes and the streams around Bella Vista, and you can find that data on our website, and that's kind of what we're going to go over today. BellaVistaPOA.com under the Things to Do tab, under the lakes heading, and then there's a water quality page. So here you can see Bella Vista outlined in cyan. And we have the lake samples in purple and the stream samples in green. From west to east, we have Loch Lomond, Lake Avalon, Lake Windsor, Lake Norwood, and Rayburn, Anne, and Brittany. For our streams, mostly our sites fall on Little Sugar and a couple of its incoming tributaries. So down towards Lowe's at the bottom, you have McKissick Creek, Ford Springs on Little Sugar, Spanker Creek, and then near the Walgreens, you have a confluence of those three incoming waters. That's the Little Sugar confluence. That's what LS stands for and the rest of the site numbers. LS1 is just downstream of the Lake Bella Vista Dam. LS2 is just upstream of the wastewater treatment facility. And LS3 is just upstream of the state line. Finally, we have a site called Gordon Hollow, which is on Gordon Hollow Road. It's actually on Browning Creek, which drains from Loch Lomond. And so all of the Little Sugar sites are in one watershed and Gordon Hollow is in a different watershed. If you're not familiar with what that means, it's you pick a point on the ground and the watershed is all of the land that water would drain through that point. So the next slide here is going to show you a progressive accumulation of the total watershed as we go from downstream sites or from upstream sites to downstream sites on Little Sugar. So here's McKissick's watershed, Fort Springs, Spanker, the confluence at the dam, wastewater, and the state line. And finally, you have Gordon Hollow as a separate watershed. So we take several different parameters on our streams and lakes. The first one is chlorophyll. So that's the green pigment in plants. For our purposes, that's planktonic algae. Turbidity, which is a measure of the stuff, the particulates in the water and how cloudy it is. pH, conductivity, which is how many ions or salts are in the water, things that conduct electricity. We have nitrate and nitrite nitrogen, total nitrogen, soluble reactive phosphorus, total phosphorus, and E. coli. We also do a couple of other things, but we're going to focus on the ones that I've mentioned already. So looking at the data, there's nothing there yet. On the left, you'll see the lake samples, and on the right, you'll see stream samples. The bottom horizontal axis is time. It shows 3 full calendar years, 2020, 21, and 22. And on the vertical side axis, you'll see the parameter values, in this case, chlorophyll. I've also included some reference points for you. At the bottom, the EPA drinking water standard, so that's what comes out of your tap. And then I've also included some values for natural waters that come from scientific research papers. And a few parameters are important for us in Bella Vista, particularly with our reservoirs, because they're related to fish management. So I'll include some of those values at the top. And finally, kind of below the graphs, I've got a qualitative description of generally what the data points are doing. So if we look at chlorophyll here, you can see that our lakes generally have high productivity when it comes to chlorophyll, kind of averaging around the 10 to 15 micrograms per liter, and streams are very low in productivity. That makes sense because streams are moving water, and that's not a very good environment for floating algae to grow. For turbidity, we have very low turbidity in both streams and lakes. There's just not a lot of stuff in the water compared to other sites. Natural waters typically range from 1 to 10 NTUs, and our sites are almost always below 5. Some stream samples can get low enough that they meet the tap water criteria. Moving on, we have pH. If you're not familiar with pH, it's a measure of acidity and basicity. 1 is very acidic and 14 is very basic. Completely neutral is 7. As Shelley mentioned, we do have karst habitat. A lot of that's limestone, and so we have a more basic water quality than some other systems. And so you can see for lakes, it kind of fluctuates around about 8.3, and for streams, about 8. And so we're on the higher end of what's typical in natural waters. For conductivity, we fall in the ideal range for what has been found in good fisheries. So that's about 150 to 500 microsiemens per centimeter. And there's really nothing much more to say about this data. It's good. Next, we have the nitrate plus nitrite data. But more typically, we like to look at the total nitrogen values. So here you can see total nitrogen. For lakes, we kind of have a medium productivity with that. It would be expected with medium productivity. For streams, we're kind of on the low to moderate end of what is normal for urban streams. So Bella Vista is a city, and we've got some roads. Little Sugar runs right next to the highway. We do have a lot of forest, but there's a good amount of impervious surface that Brad talked about before. Some really bad urban streams can get about 4 milligrams per liter. We're not even close to that. We are down there closer to 3 and 2 mostly. One interesting thing to note about the total nitrogen data is that it actually decreases as it goes through Bella Vista. So the gray lines at the top is Spencer Creek, and the kind of darker blue and purple lines at the bottom are the wastewater plant site and the state line site. So as the water travels through Bella Vista, we're actually losing total nitrogen. And you can notice down there at the bottom, Gordon Hollow, the pink line, that's the site that drains around Loch Lomond, and it's the lowest in total nitrogen. Similar to nitrogen, we have soluble reactive phosphorus, but more time than not, we look at total phosphorus. So some productivity scales would have this be in the high productivity range, such as what's shown at the top, but other scales, particularly when we talk about fish, have our phosphorus values fall in the medium productivity range. So moderate to high, depending on the scale that you're looking at. For streams, it would be on the low to medium end for urban streams. Of course, you're going to have peaks like the one that you see in 2020, but in general, it's pretty low for an urban stream. And finally, we have a pretty important one here, E. coli. So E. coli is a bacteria typically found in your gut, and it comes out in feces, which is relevant to the septic talk here. We have very, very low E. coli on our lakes. And one point of note here, you'll see a hazard threshold line. I've replaced the natural waters values with state and federal criteria. So 126 colony forming units is generally about the point where people get worried about too many people being sick by coming into contact with that water. So that line is there for reference on the graph. And you'll see that the lakes in the last 3 years have only popped up above that line twice. Generally, those numbers are more like less than 10. So very little E. coli in our lake samples. The streams are a little different story. In general, an individual stream has typically been pretty low over the last 3 years in concentrations of E. coli, but you do get regular large spikes that go above that. One thing to note on this graph is that we've taken a stormwater sample just to show you what it's like to have a big storm event come through and wash all of that poo off of the landscape and into the streams. That peak usually happens in about 2 days, and that's when we took this sample. So you can see for lakes, very little happened anyway. Very small peak above the hazard threshold, but you get a much larger peak for streams. And if you zoom in a little bit on the streams, you can see that most of the peaks that are above the hazard threshold come from the downstream sites. So that's McKissick and Spanker, Fort Springs, and down by the Lake Bella Vista Dam. And finally, here's a slide that just kind of compiles all of those qualitative descriptions of the data. And you can look at it for a few minutes while we change speakers.
So I'm not a septic system specialist or genius with water quality or anything like that. I'm the senior planner over at CDS, and CDS is the entity of the city government that reviews development related applications. So people that come build a house, and normally that 78% of them will normally come with a septic system. Anytime they want to build that, they will need a permit to do so from the city of Bella Vista City Community Development Services. And with that building application will also come with a GEC application that is concurrent, and that reviews the stormwater runoff. We are one of the few cities in NWA that reviews smaller sites for stormwater runoff and grading and erosion control. So sites under an acre, really any site, because most of the development here happens on 1/4 to 1/3 of an acre of a lot. We review stormwater mitigation for any site in the city limits of Bella Vista. So I just have some fast facts here. I'm trying to leave as much time as we can, so both the people that are joining us online can put some questions in the chat box if you want to go ahead and start putting those in there. start collecting those questions in the chat box as well as those who attend at the end of this. We'll be glad to answer as many questions as we can. But Bella Vista currently has about 16,000 dwelling units that are hooked to a water tap. And of those 16,000, only 3,600 or 3,596 specifically of them are currently on a sewer tap. So that's leaving about 12,400 existing homes in Bella Vista on its own individual septic system for wastewater. That means about 77% of our existing houses right now have their own septic system, which means that's a lot of septic systems within one city limit. And on top of having 77% of our houses on septic system, we also have the most lakes than many or most cities in NWA, let alone Southwest Missouri, this area, with a total of 7 lakes. And so it's important to know where your stormwater or what's in your stormwater that's leaving your site, because it all goes downhill and the lakes are downhill and our streams are downhill. We are also, as Brad noted at the very beginning, we are part of a program called the MS4 program. He kind of touched on that. So part of that, we do education programs like this, as well as DEQ or Arkansas Department of Environmental Quality. We do permits, as I've already noted, anything less than an acre, which is most of Bella Vista, we do permitting for and oversee that stormwater mitigation. And kind of the development process, Richard touched on it a little bit from the Arkansas Department of Health. So to even apply or before a developer even starts the development process in Bella Vista, they'll typically call city planning and say, what do I need to do to start this process? And we tell them, make sure your lot has adequate utilities, and that's typically water and sewer. And if it doesn't have sewer, you're going to need to make your way to the Arkansas Department of Health as they oversee the sewage system or the septic systems. You'll need to find out what it perks for, which I learned tonight that may not be a correct term anymore. But we'll see what the soil allows in size in terms of bedroom size, because that will typically also be a part of the decision-making process whether someone wants to invest and develop this lot. If it only perks for a 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom, it goes into their long-term plan of what that lot's going to look like and what their home's going to look like. And after they've mitigated their sewer or their wastewater mitigation and got their water connection, and then they'll start the rest of the process where house layout and with their plot plans and floor plans and all of that. And then they'll apply for the building permit, as well as show us how they're going to mitigate and keep stormwater, all the dirty water on site. So that way it doesn't leave the site and go into the common property or ravines and our lakes and our streams with the GEC. And after we've ensured that it meets all of our codes regarding septic systems, our building code, international building code, and as well as our own municipal chapter here. And then it meets our grading and erosion and stormwater discharge codes. There's all kinds of codes to apply those 2 permits to. It will be issued, and that is whenever the developer will start work. But just to note, the ADH permit, just thank you for touching on that on your side too, but that is before they start the development process at next door. So some of the things that we're looking at on a city level for septics, again, is really overseen by the ADH. We're really looking at placement of the septic system, and basic things are, if it does not have a pre-treatment system, it has to be 100 feet from any body of water. But if it does have a pre-treatment system, it can be 25 feet from any body of water and 10 feet from property lines, 10 feet from the house. However, columns like decks and pier columns and items like that can be 5 feet from the septic system. So mainly we're looking at placement and making sure that you're not encroaching your septic system with driveways, cart paths, sidewalks, anything that needs grading or cutting into the land that could hurt the septic system and cause some damage and then leaching downhill. We're looking at that as well during our plan review. And then our stormwater discharge ordinance, they really do go hand in hand because septic systems leach and that goes on the ground. And so anything that sits on the ground, since we are an MS4, it's all considered a sewer or a stormwater system. We have ordinances in place that talk about leaching septic systems, anything or failing septic systems if it's causing groundwater. We have ordinances in place for that. For a protocol follow-up if that were to happen. And then we also have our stormwater discharge ordinance, which is up here, that kind of speaks to wastewater as a prohibited stormwater pollutant. So we do have lots of ordinances in place that go hand in hand with what we're talking about tonight. And if you have any further questions about that, I have cards and be happy to help you navigate our municipal code, which is all online. And then I also wanted to do a call out. There's been an extreme wealth of knowledge here tonight. And this has been extremely valuable. We also on our website have access to EPA documents, which is also free. wealth of knowledge as well, or you can just navigate to the EPA website directly. But there's lots of helpful information both on our website, EPA, and every single item that's here tonight. And yeah, the city of Bella Vista would really like to thank H2O Ozarks, the POA Water Quality Lab, Department of Health, and then of course our MS4 Stormwater Extension Office. This has been extremely knowledgeable, and I myself have learned a lot. Never thought I would know so much about septic systems when I chose my profession to be a city planner. So I'm thankful for it, and I continue to learn every day because of septic systems. So we have a lot of questions coming in already with our online viewers, but if we want to start with the people that are here, however you guys want to manage that, if we want to do this by raising your hand. I was gonna say, so these fancy little microphones up here have a green light if you click it. So if someone asks you a question, you can turn it on and speak into it. That way everyone here can help you. So let's just start online. Go ahead.
I have a question about the pumps. I had a septic system before at my old house with the fingers. The pumps with the big green top and then the thing with the red light. Do we have fingers for that, or it just gets pumped out?
Well, it depends. I mean, I don't know. It could go either way. And when you mean the fingers, you're talking about that design where it had all the little hoses coming out of it?
Yeah,
Yeah, it could be either one. I mean, most of the time it's just pump it to a distribution box, just that concrete box. If it's going to one of those splitter valves, you should see hopefully another box out in the yard somewhere that has an access riser. Because most of the time, if they have those on them, they're going to have some kind of riser. So if you don't have access, it's probably just a distribution box.
so do those have to be pumped out?
No, not normally.
Okay,
It's the tank itself. I mean, if you uncover usually when you uncover the distribution box, you're trying to, see if there's some kind of problem. If you have 5 lines, but water's coming out of 3 of them to the surface and you're not getting any water anywhere else, you probably would need to get into the D box at that time.
and when the red light comes on, who do you call? Septic person?
Yeah, it would be good to know who installed it. If you had the name of the installer, then you could call them. If not, then pretty much any other, septic system installer could probably come out and have a look at it for you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So the paperwork that we got up front says 3 to 5 years to have it checked and pumped, but you're saying 7 to 10.
Well, I think the recommendation is probably 5 to 7 to have it done. It just differs. If you've got, a 1,250 gallon tank and there's only 2 people living in the house, then you could probably go 10 years. But if you've got a 1,250 gallon tank and there's 7 people, you probably ought to do it every 3 to 5 years. It just depends on how much water is going into it.
Why did you get a whiff of sewer gas out of a sink or somewhere?
Yeah, I don't know about it coming out of the sink. All of that stuff should be vented up over the house. A lot of times, in a place where you have this density of septic systems, you may catch a whiff of sewer every now and again, just because of the way houses are set up in the hills and everything. But if you're smelling it in the house, I'm not really sure.
P-trap,
yeah, it may be a P-trap issue and not actually a septic issue.
It could be something to build a nest. Your thoughts?
That would be great. Yeah.
Is there a listing of certified septic tank service personnel for the area?
There are, yeah, you can go to healthyarkansas.gov and there are a list of designers, installers, septic tank pumpers. All of those people are listed on there. Healthyarkansas.gov.
We have a flyer up here on the front table that has that website listed out. You want to pick that up?
So is there a place so we can, for the city to actually get the information about our septic tank? Septic system?
I know the health department maintains copies of the permits. They're usually filed under, the name of whoever the permit was issued under, but I think we can get them up here on subdivision lot and block address. We should be able to find them. And I think the city maintains those copies too, I would think. So if not, then you should be able to get it at the health department. you know, they move offices a couple of times, so there's a possibility that something could have been misplaced, but chances are we've got it.
The permits are also sometimes online. If you know how to find your parcel through the Benton County website, you might find a link to your permit. If you don't find a link to the permit, it doesn't mean you don't have one. It just means that a number of reasons it might not be there.
Yeah, there are a couple, and Taylor could speak to this, that there are a couple of different GIS maps, and one of the GIS maps will not have a link to the septic system, but there's another GIS link that does. So, and so far, I don't know about, I'm the oldest of city council, I'm pretty close to this conversation, but I've been going on looking at a lot of different properties, and so far, there's only one that I have not found the septic layout on. And in regards to the distribution box, you know, you showed the one that where the valves turn. I moved here 15 years ago and I had a wet spot, a little moss on the top of my yard, couldn't figure out where it was. And without taking through all the process, it took me a little research to find out about the distribution box. It had been covered up, you know, about 5 inches underneath the ground. My yard looked like World War II trying to find it and dig it up. I finally found it. I know where it is now, but you have to take that distribution lid off, distribution box lid off, so you can manually turn those valves and redistribute the water. It's not really a fun process.
Yeah, it's not.
Well, my neighbors is covered up as well. And I do know, again, through some of our work, there are a lot of distribution boxes that are covered up.
Right.
So anyway.
Yeah, good point.
Is the permit and the plan the same thing? Like if I look at my permit, will it show the plan on the plot?
They're two separate things, but the plan is a part of the permit.
Okay.
So the plan should be included with that permit.
There's an awful lot of metal tanks still out here. And I've been here long enough to see some of them collapse and everything else. And in the past, there's been people who wanted to come and pump it to sort of try to fix the system. And a whole bunch of them are literally about pumping it because you're not really pumping, you're sucking. And as they do that, depending on how good they are, they could literally suck the sides in on an old metal tank.
Yeah, I think that is a possibility. I mean, me personally, if I had a metal tank, I would want to do whatever I could to get rid of it, to get it replaced, because I wouldn't want to run the possibility of walking out in the yard one day and falling into it. Yeah, so if I had a metal tank and I was concerned about it being, you know, imploding when I had it pumped out, then I would probably just accept that that was going to happen and go ahead and be prepared to replace the tank.
I venture to say, because of how this place was originally developed, a whole bunch of people don't have a clue what kind of tank they've got.
Yeah.
Because they're buried with no pipes.
It should show on the plan at the city. If there's a circle on your plan, unless it's been replaced, it will be a metal tank. If it's a square, it's a concrete tank. So that's something you can.
Good enough. Good, yeah.
I have a question about the diversion valves. When I had my tank pumped the last 2 times, they were not able to turn it for me. It's too tight, I can't turn it. And the last time, I was told not to bother with it. I didn't need to do it. Anyway, otherwise I need to have it replaced. And is it expensive to replace?
Yeah, I would replace it. If I couldn't turn it, I would get it replaced.
And who does that?
A septic installer. Yep.
I might ask a question or two from the online audience here. If on a septic system, what is advised to put down the garbage disposal? As little as possible. Second one, what sanitary wipes are best to use? If none.
Well, don't flush them. Yeah, I mean, don't flush sanitary wipes. If you want to use wipes in the house, that's fine. Just don't flush them. Put them in the trash.
And then one more before we hop back to the audience. How much should I expect it to cost to have my septic tank pumped? Is there some formula to go by as to how often this should be done? Single person in a 3-bedroom house, and I've lived here for 16 years for some context.
Yeah, I mean, single person in a 3-bedroom house, they may be able to go, you know, 15, 16 years without having a tank pump. I think, I don't know if anybody's had it done recently, but I would think it's probably somewhere in that $300 range.
Mine was 300.
Yeah, about $300 to have it pumped.
We've polled, and I think budgeting between 350 and 500, depending on where you are and how big your tank is. There's been a fuel surcharge added recently. So we always tell people, if you just think of it like budgeting, between 350 and 500. I've used to pump mine every 3 years. I have small children, though, they flush things they probably shouldn't. Better safe than sorry, I think.
When we closed on our house, they produced a plot at the title company that was a complete reverse of how the house was laid out. It was the only plot, I went down to the county that they had. And there had not been any of the updates that had been done on the house that were listed. Well, my septic field goes down into the valley. And they let and planted over it and let other things. Now, we had it pumped prior to us taking possession of it, and it was all right. Haven't done it since, because they won't go down my hill, my valley, to get it. And so I kind of know where the spots are, but I have no valid plot from that, and nobody can tell me, other than having the whole system, and paying big bucks, to have it replotted. We kind of found where things are.
Most of the time, the septic tank is gonna be about 10 foot from the house.
I'm sorry,
The septic tank should be, most of the time, should be about 10 foot from the house. It shouldn't be any closer, and most of the time in Bella Vista, it's not gonna be any farther away
well, my
because
box
it's such limited space.
is on one side, the lines are all shut out on the other side of the house.
Okay,
Okay,
well,
and,
the tank is what they need access to.
right, yeah, and I'm pretty sure we can get to the tank, it's just the other lines in there, the interval box that you're talking about. And nobody can give me a valid answer on it, so I thought, well, I'll come here and see if I get any.
There's some technology out there now where they can actually run cameras down in there and identify where the components are. Maybe even some electro trackers, send those down and they ping back information about where the components are, but you may be able to have a camera and determine exactly where everything is. And I don't know how much that costs, and not every installer in Northwest Arkansas can do it, but there are a few.
I would expect that to cost between $500 and $600.
I'm sorry,
I think the cost for that is generally between maybe between $400 and $600.
Yeah.
The equipment's very expensive.
Hello, I'm new here and I'm currently in a rental. And occasionally, when we're sitting outside, we'll get a whiff of the sewage. It's not all the time, and it doesn't last all the time. I've even walked around to see if I see anything I don't. And I have had the tank, had it pumped out when we first moved in. Someone said that it could be something with the vent or something. Is that normal? Is that, because that's not something we felt before.
Yeah, it is possible that it could just be coming down from the vent. Everything's vented out, and if you get a gust of wind coming the right direction, it could blow it right down in there. There's also a possibility that you could have a neighbor, with an issue, or you could be smelling it from the vent of neighbor. With the proximity, the septic systems, the density here, it's not surprising that occasionally you might catch a whiff of something. But the wetness is, what I would be really concerned about. Shelley and I both showed pictures of those stripes running through the yard. And I kind of want to point out, just because you're seeing those stripes, it's not necessarily a bad thing. In that drought, they were the only areas in the yard that were getting any water. So of course the grass was going to be green. But typical septic system failure, you're not just going to see an area of greenness, it's going to be damp when the area around it is not. So, just getting a little smell every now and again may not be a terrible concern, but it's those areas of wetness out in the yard is what you really need to be concerned about.
I have a question. We're having a house built at Bella Vista, and we're at the point now where the water is going to be hooked up. And I was just wondering, where does that drinking water come from? Because I have Colgan, that's going to come and put a full house filter on, and is that necessary? We're from New York, so you really need the filter.
Actually, Brad would be a good person.
Beaver Lake is where all your drinking water comes. It tastes real foul right now.
And that's just because of Alfie. It's perfectly safe. It's perfectly safe.
Thank you.
I have one last question from our online spectators here. I was recently told that a tree's roots have busted into my system's concrete tank. I will be taking the tree down, but what will the outcome be of the roots that have already broken through the system? I think there's just 2 tanks, not just one, if that matters.
Well, if the tree roots have actually broken into the tank, then the tank itself is compromised. It's not watertight anymore. So the tank would probably need to be replaced if the roots have gotten into it. Now, sometimes they might just enter through the pipe. You know, if a pipe came loose and the tree roots may go in through the outlet, you may be able to just get the roots out of the tank. But if it's cracked at the tank, the concrete tank, then it's compromised and needs to be replaced.
Is the city still putting in sewer, where we can hook up, but I've only been here 2 years. I was told that they thought the sewer was coming down, but haven't seen or heard anything since.
So the city doesn't have any sewer. It's privately owned by Village Wastewater. And I don't believe we have a representative here to speak on their behalf. But as far as public utilities, we don't have public utilities here.
In my real estate work here, I found that developers started installing concrete septic tanks in about 1984 or 85. So if your house was built before then and your tank hasn't been replaced, you likely have a galvanized tank or had a galvanized tank.
What about plastic?
That's what the new ones are installing.
Are there plastic?
Yeah, they're usually installing, when I have a house sale and it's a galvanized tank, we replace it with a plastic tank. The last one we did was about $4,000. 84 or 85. And the septic plans are available through the city's website citizens portal.
You would want to keep her.
Up to you guys. I mean, if you guys are tight on time, I know we're going over, but like I said, super great presentation and really great questions being asked. Are you okay with a few more questions?
Anybody? Nope.
So basically, the fewer people you have in your house for what it's rated for means that it should last longer than normal. Correct.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
If, so we have a 2-bedroom house, but it's just me and my wife. So it means, so that's generally fewer people than it's designed for. The fewer people you have in your house, generally less water you're going to use. That means generally your septic system should last longer.
Well, at least the frequency of your tank pumping, should increase. You shouldn't have to pump the tank as often. Yeah.
So then how do they degrade to the point where they have to be replaced? What's that split? Why do they have to be replaced?
The tank itself?
Well, or just your septic system. You said they have a life expectancy.
Right. Yeah. Well, if the lateral lines have been damaged in some way, if someone got up there and drove over with a cement and crushed everything, well, those are going to have to be replaced. If they filled up with tree roots, something like that, then they would need to be replaced. But really, you're only going to know they need to be replaced if they've stopped working and you can't get them to work. So if water's being distributed the way it's supposed to be distributed and you're not putting more in there than you're supposed to and it's not working, then chances are it's time to replace it.
Two more questions. Okay, you guys have
Your plan, will it show if it's supposed to have that diverter valve, it will show on there? That was first question. Second question real quick. Concrete tank here, I was a realtor in another state and they require aerators. Here, that's not a requirement. Okay, so I think that's what we have.
Normally the aerators would only be required if there was.
We, on our plan, it showed five fingers. There's two showing now, and three not showing. We don't know anything about it. And you say that the plans do show if there's diverters. What defines that on the plan if it has diverters?
A diversion valve system, there should be one line leaving the septic tank. It would leave the septic tank, go through a little circle and become two lines. And then it would kind of feed each line individually. If you don't have a diversion valve, it's either gonna go to a distribution box with multiple outlets or get some kind of spider valve or splitter valve. But if you have a diversion valve, one line leaving the tank and then going into what would look like a little circle, there's that indicate.
Okay, I think that wraps up our questions. But thank you for everyone for coming. This was a great turnout, and thank you for all the speakers. Everyone here learned a lot. There are also some handouts up here if you guys wanted to grab one before heading out. Yeah, for CDS.
Okay.
Saw website posts that.
The guy in green, he's the one that. He's been doing research on that.